Max Verstappen thought the Austrian Grand Prix was finished. But after the checkered flag, the FIA opened a new investigation, and suddenly, one piece of contact with Lewis Hamilton became much bigger than a racing incident. Because this is not just about two champions touching wheels. It is about whether Verstappen's most feared weapon, his ability to squeeze, pressure, and force rivals into impossible decisions, has finally pushed Formula One into a corner it can no longer ignore. And here is the dangerous part. If the FIA decides Verstappen crossed the line, it could change the way every driver defends from the very next race. But if they clear him, it sends an even louder message to the entire grid. Hamilton knows exactly what this means. Verstappen knows it too. Because when these two collide, the question is never only who was right. The real question is, what is Formula One willing to allow when the most aggressive driver of his generation meets the most experienced champion on the grid? And the answer may reveal something far bigger than Austria. Subscribe to the channel. Austria is the kind of racetrack where Formula One arguments are born. Not because it looks complicated. Actually, that is the trap. The Red Bull Ring looks simple from the outside. It is short, fast, and clean. There are not endless corners twisting through a city. There are not walls waiting inches from the tires. There is no maze of slow sections where cars disappear from view. But that simplicity is exactly what makes it dangerous. Because when the lap is short, everything comes back quickly. The braking zones arrive faster. The battles repeat faster. The pressure builds faster. And when two drivers start fighting, they do not get much time to reset their minds before the next attack begins. That is where Verstappen and Hamilton found themselves. Two champions, two completely different racing instincts, and one piece of track that suddenly became too small for both of them. And here is what most people miss. Contact in Formula One is not judged only by the sound of two cars touching. It is judged by the story that happened before that sound. Where was the attacker? Where was the defender? Who had earned space? Who had control? Who made the move that turned a hard battle into something the FIA needed to examine after the race? That is why this investigation matters. Because from the outside, it is easy to say, Verstappen and Hamilton touched, so someone must be guilty. But inside Formula One, the real question is much sharper. Did Verstappen leave Hamilton enough racing room, or did he use pressure so perfectly that Hamilton was left with nowhere safe to go? And that question is dangerous, because Verstappen's entire reputation is built on pressure. He does not simply defend a corner. He makes the other driver feel the corner closing before the car even gets there. He makes rivals decide earlier than they want to decide. He turns a normal overtake into a test of nerve. And most of the time, that is what makes him almost impossible to beat. But when that pressure creates contact, everything changes. Suddenly, the same quality that makes Verstappen feared becomes the exact thing the stewards may study frame by frame. Was it skill? Was it control? Was it intimidation? Or was it one step too far? Hamilton understands that line better than almost anyone, because he has spent his entire career living beside it. He knows when a move is real. He knows when a door is open. He knows when a driver is trying to force him into a decision that may look like his fault from the outside. And against Verstappen, that judgment becomes even harder. Because Hamilton is not fighting just another driver. He is fighting someone who has built an empire on refusing to make life easy for anyone. That is why Austria became more than a race. It became a test. A test of how much space one champion owes another. A test of how much aggression Formula One is willing to protect. A test of whether the FIA sees Verstappen's defending as hard racing, or as something that finally needs a warning attached to it. And the most important part is still coming, because the contact itself is only the surface. The real story begins when the FIA looks beyond the moment of impact, and starts asking what Verstappen's move tells every other driver on the grid. The investigation did not appear out of nowhere. That is the part that makes this story feel different. In Formula One, race control sees contact all the time. Cars touch under braking. Wings get clipped. Drivers complain on the radio. Teams send messages instantly, trying to shape the story before the stewards even have the full picture. Most of those moments fade. They get noted, reviewed, and absorbed into the noise of a Grand Prix weekend. But when the FIA opens a new post-race investigation, the temperature changes. Because now, the incident is no longer just a flash of anger on the circuit. It becomes a formal question. A question with paperwork, evidence, footage, and consequences. And that is exactly why Verstappen suddenly found himself under a different kind of pressure. Not the pressure of Hamilton attacking into a corner. Not the pressure of tires losing grip. Not the pressure of managing a car at the limit. This was slower, colder, and maybe more dangerous. Because after the race, Verstappen could no longer control the moment with his driving. He could only wait while other people decided what his driving meant. That is where Formula One becomes brutal. On track, a driver lives by instinct. He reacts in fractions of a second. He feels the car move beneath him. He senses where the rival is. He commits before the brain can fully explain what the body has already done. But the stewards do not judge it at racing speed. They slow it down. They freeze it. They compare angles. They separate emotion from evidence. And once that happens, even a tiny movement can become enormous. A steering correction that seemed natural in the cockpit can look deliberate from above. A squeeze that felt like normal defending can look like denying space. A driver holding the racing line can suddenly be accused of acting as though the other car was not there. That is the danger for Verstappen. Because his driving has always lived in that uncomfortable space between genius and risk. He does not wait for permission. He does not race like a driver hoping the door stays open. He races like a driver who believes the door belongs to him until someone proves otherwise. That is why he wins so many battles before the corner is even finished. But it is also why every controversial contact around him becomes so explosive. Because people are not just watching the incident. They are watching the pattern they think they already understand. And with Hamilton, that pattern becomes even louder. Hamilton is not a random rival caught in a messy fight. He is the one driver whose history with Verstappen instantly turns a small moment into a global argument. Their battles carry weight. They carry memory. They carry years of fans choosing sides before the evidence even lands on the table. And that is what makes this post-race investigation so delicate. The FIA cannot afford to judge the legend. It has to judge the move. But separating those two things is harder than it sounds. Because when Verstappen and Hamilton touch, the sport does not react calmly. It goes back in time. It remembers every disputed corner, every radio complaint, every moment when one side believed the other had crossed the line, every moment when the stewards were accused of being too soft, too strict, too late, or too inconsistent. And suddenly, Austria is not only Austria anymore. It becomes part of a much bigger argument about what Formula One has allowed over the years, and what it is willing to allow now. That is where the hidden conflict begins. Because the question is not simply whether Verstappen made contact with Hamilton. The deeper question is whether Verstappen used his position in a way that made contact almost unavoidable. That is a very different accusation. One says, two cars touched. The other says, one driver shaped the situation so tightly that the other had no clean escape. And the difference between those two ideas can decide everything. Think of it like walking beside someone through a narrow hallway. If your shoulders brush, maybe it is nothing. Maybe the hallway was crowded. Maybe both of you kept walking and neither person really caused it. But if one person slowly moves across until the other is pressed against the wall, that is different. The contact may still look small. The message behind it is not. Formula One works the same way, only faster, louder, and with far more at stake. A driver does not need to make a huge movement to create a huge problem. Sometimes, a car only needs to drift a little. Sometimes, a driver only needs to delay leaving space for a fraction too long. Sometimes, the entire incident is born before the wheels touch, in the moment one driver decides the rival must either back out or accept the risk. That is why the FIA's investigation is so important. It suggests the officials wanted to understand not only the impact, but the choice that created it. And this is where Verstappen's defenders will make their strongest argument. They will say this is Formula One. They will say champions are supposed to fight hard. They will say Hamilton has enough experience to know when a door is closing, and that backing out is sometimes part of racing. They will say Verstappen should not be punished for being Verstappen. And that argument has power, because nobody wants Formula One to become soft. Nobody wants drivers afraid to defend. Nobody wants every wheel-to-wheel fight turned into a courtroom. But Hamilton's side of the argument is just as powerful. Because racing hard does not mean racing as though the other car disappears. If a driver has earned space, that space has to mean something. If a car is alongside, the defender cannot simply pretend the corner belongs only to him. And if the FIA does not protect that idea, then attacking becomes a gamble where the brave driver is punished for trusting the rules. That is the tension. Formula One wants drivers to fight. But it also needs them to believe the fight has boundaries. Without boundaries, aggression becomes a weapon with no cost. With too many boundaries, racing loses its edge. Austria forced the FIA to stand right in the middle of that argument. And Verstappen, once again, became the driver at the center of it. Because nobody on the grid exposes Formula One's limits like he does. He finds the weak spots in hesitation. He understands fear in another driver's hands. He knows that if he places the car with enough certainty, the rival has to make the uncomfortable decision. Do they trust him? Do they trust the rules? Or do they step away before the contact happens? That is not just speed. That is psychological pressure. And against Hamilton, psychological pressure has a different flavor. Hamilton has seen every kind of defensive move. He has fought world champions, rising stars, desperate midfield drivers, and teammates who knew exactly where he was vulnerable. He knows when a battle is clean. He knows when a battle is turning ugly. And he knows when a driver is trying to make him look responsible for a situation he did not create alone. That is why this incident cannot be understood only through one frame. One frame can show contact. It cannot show the buildup of pressure. It cannot show the expectation each driver had entering the corner. It cannot show the invisible calculation happening inside both helmets. Hamilton may have believed he had enough of the car alongside to deserve room. Verstappen may have believed he had enough control of the corner to keep his line firm. And between those two beliefs, Formula One found its problem. Because both drivers may have felt certain. But certainty does not always prevent contact. Sometimes, certainty causes it. That is the uncomfortable truth hiding behind this investigation. The most dangerous Formula One incidents are not always created by confusion. They can be created by two champions who both believe they are right. Neither driver enters the moment thinking, I am about to create a problem. They enter thinking, I am entitled to this space. And when both believe that at the same time, the circuit suddenly becomes too narrow. This is where the FIA's decision becomes bigger than Verstappen. Because every driver will study what happens next. If the ruling suggests that a defender can hold firm in this kind of situation, attackers will think twice before staying committed on the outside, or inside, or wherever the fight takes them. They will know that being alongside may not be enough. They may decide the risk is no longer worth it. But if the ruling suggests that Verstappen had to leave more space, defenders will adjust too. They will know that pressure has a limit. They will know that squeezing a rival into a disappearing gap can bring consequences after the race, even if the moment looked manageable at full speed. And that is why the investigation matters to the entire grid. The younger drivers are watching. The team principals are watching. The engineers are watching too, because strategy is not only about tires and pit stops. It is also about knowing how much risk your driver can take when fighting the biggest names in the sport. A decision like this becomes information. It tells teams what kind of defense is safe. It tells drivers what kind of attack the stewards may protect. It tells everyone where the invisible line might be moving. And for Verstappen, that is the part that could matter most. Because his edge has always come from understanding the line better than everyone else. Not just the white line on the track. The emotional line. The legal line. The line between fear and respect. The line between a rival backing out and a rival refusing to move. When Verstappen is at his best, he lives exactly there. But if the FIA decides that this time he went beyond it, even by a small amount, the message is massive. It would not just say Verstappen made a mistake. It would say the sport is watching the way he creates pressure. And that could force the most aggressive driver on the grid to think differently in the next wheel-to-wheel fight. Not slower. Not weaker. But differently. And in Formula One, even one extra thought at the wrong moment can change everything. A driver who hesitates for half a heartbeat may lose the corner. A driver who leaves a little more room may invite an attack. A driver who fears a penalty may defend less naturally. That is why this story is not really about one piece of contact. It is about whether Verstappen's greatest strength could become something he has to manage. And that is exactly where the next layer begins. Because the FIA's decision will not only affect Verstappen and Hamilton. It could reshape the way every future battle is fought, especially when the championship pressure starts turning small contacts into season-defining moments.